Welcome to the SA Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Terence Mentor, and I'm a digital marketer who's realized that since this industry is constantly changing, we need to be constantly learning. And I think the best way to learn all of the things is to talk to the people who are doing all of the things. So this podcast is a chance to do just that. For this first season of the SA Digital Marketing Podcast, I've interviewed 5 of SA's top digital marketers about their careers, what they think of the state of the industry right now, and most importantly, what advice they have for someone looking to improve their digital marketing skill sets. Up until now, every episode has been a collection of answers from all of our experts, but today we are listening to the full interview that I had with Jono Duguid. He's a digital marketer working for R17 Ventures, but hey, I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Jono Duguid. I work at R17 Ventures, an international performance marketing agency, working from the beautiful city of Cape Town, working with clients from across the globe. And I currently work in helping businesses grow to achieve growth through customer acquisition or retention, and really helping them build and scale their brands as quickly as possible.
Okay, so how did you get to this point in your career? I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about digital marketing or they're looking at current digital marketers, there's a lot of roads to this kind of world, this larger world that we're in. So I would love to know how you got to this point, and go back as far as you feel you need to go back.
All right. So my journey into digital starts many, many moons ago. I'm one of those OGs. I guess, going back to even my school days, when I was 10 years old, I realized that we had a program on our computer that I could create websites on. And so I started just creating random websites. And then as I got older, things like GeoCities existed, and my younger colleagues look at me and say, "What is GeoCities?"
I was going to say GeoCities. That's throwing your age out there.
Playing around with things like GeoCities and various other tools. And then I guess, when MySpace became a thing, I was there solidly on MySpace. I had that blinged out profile with all those GIFs that we used to try and find everywhere. And then Facebook came out, and we made the move over to Facebook relatively early on. And of course, then Facebook started offering opportunities to create pages and things. And so I was creating pages just for random things too. Thought of myself as a celebrity at the time, one up and coming celebrity at the time.
Didn't we all at one point? Yeah, you get 100 followers and you're like, this is my life now. This is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and then I guess went to varsity, got involved with campus radio, and all of a sudden, I had a show, and I wanted to create a website for the show. I wanted to create a Facebook page for the show, and I guess I've always had an interest in harnessing digital to uplift, kind of traditional in that kind of sense, find a way to really help things live on. And all of our listeners at the time, young students, were also taking in digital. They were trying to move away from more traditional means. So I kind of went in there. I became then one of the earlier members of Twitter also in South Africa, when we used to have things like tweet ups, where you would meet the people that you follow in real life.
This I remember. This is going back, way back in time.
So we'd have tweet ups and meet up with people, and then also have these events where later on where you would go and you'd be invited as a Twitter influencer to go and tweet about. Again, early days of Twitter. I mean, I think I had maybe 2,000 followers, but there I was an influencer because most South Africans didn't have that many followers. And I guess it kind of just grew from there. So while I was in campus radio, I also got involved with managing the radio station's website and all the various online channels as a bit of a side hustle to what I was doing there, and got into Twitter. And then through Twitter, I actually got to know someone that was involved in early digital marketing in South Africa. We became really good friends. We became best friends, and I managed to harness a lot of knowledge from her, which was really awesome. And following, leaving university, I didn't complete my degree, but I left, and then I stayed on at radio. I then got a job at the Baxter Theatre in the marketing department to do a marketing internship, which was incredible. And part of the goal there was to help them harness digital. And so while I was there, I managed to make them the biggest theatre online in South Africa, which was a huge accomplishment for me at the time. Internship ended, and I kind of started doing freelance, and then started working with this friend's agency, which she then started, and so on and so forth. Fast forward a few years, and I find myself now, working for one of the leading digital performance marketing agencies in the world, which is incredible.
So throughout that story, there are moments of you getting real like experiential learning. You're doing the stuff and you're learning by doing. And if you're not learning by doing, you're learning from someone else who has done it and is then helping you grow. And you also mentioned that, at some point you stopped with the university and just went straight into, again, doing the business. How do you feel the kind of formal education part of digital marketing meets up with the experiential part? Did you do any formal courses, and how does that interact with each other? Is one more important than each other?
At the time, there weren't any proper courses around. We were all just learning through experimentation, because we were all like, there were a handful of us who were saying, this is the next big thing. I even remember it was probably about 2010, and I have it in one of my old email accounts. I reached out to Absa Bank saying, guys, I want to get you guys on digital. And I had a contact there that was really high up in the HR. And she said to me, Jono, the bank just doesn't see the future of digital. They think it's a
very long-term visions, proper long-term vision there.
So that's what we were going up against. In those early days, I was going up against a lot of businesses that think, it's just a fad. The social media thing is going to die down. It's just a fad. Young people are on it. They're going to get over themselves. They're going to move on. And so that's kind of what we were up against. And so there weren't really any courses available. Soonish afterwards, there was a course called Quirk. It was done by the Quirk agency, and that now actually falls part of Red and Yellow. So Red and Yellow took over Quirk, and so if you go to their campus, you can actually see they've got like the old school Quirk stuff, which is really nice to see. But I think it means very little to a lot of young people. So Quirk had their course, but what I really loved about them was they were also about empowering, a lot like you're doing with this podcast. So they had this 700-page textbook that was made available for free for anybody. You could just download it. If you had the means to do the course, then you could do the course. But if you didn't have the means, at least you had the learning materials that you could learn it yourself. And so that was super awesome. So I did download it. I think I read through a little bit of it. But yeah, me and reading are not the best of friends, if we're perfectly honest. But yeah, otherwise, a lot of it was just learning as you go. And also going back to my first job, the marketing internship at the Baxter Theatre, I got the best piece of advice ever while I worked there. It came from my boss at the time, Fahim Stellenboom. And every time I moved job, he was always the first person to congratulate me. And I say, Fahim, this is because of you. I'm moving up because of this single piece of advice that you gave me, or two pieces. The first was giving me a chance, but the second piece was that advice. And the advice was, in everything you do, be a sponge. Absorb everything. If it's not your job description, doesn't matter. Just learn those skills, gain those extra skills that are going to help you in the future. And so I took that advice to heart. I absorbed every piece of knowledge I could, every kind of skill I could. And to me, that was a big part of it. But then again, it's also through also these tweet ups and these meeting up with other digital people where we were able to have these discussions. Then all of a sudden, digital started having courses. So after Quirk, there were a few other courses that started to exist. I don't want to name any of them because I'm probably going to make a lot of enemies, and I'd rather not have enemies. But I'll never forget, there was this event called Net Profit. Profit spelled Prophet. And it was these annual major events with top digital speakers that took place. And it was actually free of entry, at least for the first few years. They tried to monetize it later on, and it didn't quite work out. But, anyone who was anyone in digital was at net profit events. And I remember talking to the person that was heading the digital marketing course for one of South Africa's top universities and one of their online partners. And I was like, there's no hope. There is no hope for the future. People are going to be wasting their money on this course. I think it has gotten a lot better, having looked at the things through the years. I think probably the closest out of, the colleges and things that I'm seeing that are delivering the best kind of talent is schools like Red and Yellow, where we as an agency are also invited, and we go and we do guest lectures there. So they're very open to agencies and to players in the space that are doing big things to come and actually educate the students on what they're doing and what the latest developments are in that field. So it doesn't remain so stagnant. And I think that model really, really works well, and they've managed to harness it quite well. I think IMM Stellenbosch also has a fair amount of that too. But generally speaking, I think that traditional university, if you're wanting to go into digital, might not be the thing. But I will also caveat on that. We've seen some of our best talent come from accounting students, BComs. And so they understand unit economics and they understand business. And when we're, as an agency, for us, it's about helping our clients increase their revenue and, more importantly, increase their profitability. So understanding that is a skill that I think is often overlooked within the digital landscape. And so being able to have that and then be able to learn digital is also super important. I think you can go a long way by being able to understand the basic rules of business.
So there's a real mix of some old school hard skills that is in a textbook somewhere that, if the textbook is 30 years old, it still applies to modern marketing and business practices. But I guess, I did the Red and Yellow Advanced Diploma. You spoke about them, so I'll speak about them. And the one great thing about that is that it was all up to date. It was content from the year that you were studying. I looked at some other courses, and the textbook's printed in 2016. And even if the textbook's printed 2 years ago, it's out of date. There's no mention of TikTok in a lot of these spaces. Definitely no mention of AI. Like, there's no concept of the speed to which things change with a lot of the education things I've seen. So 100% agree with you that you have to be very cautious, especially when it's like a 6-week course on teaching you everything you need to know about this very complex, huge industry that we have to study in, or at least work in. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is your R17, the company that you currently work for. Like you're saying, it's really focusing on developing growth and retention rates for customers. You specifically are in the performance marketing part of the business. Is that an accurate breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, we're a digital performance marketing agency. It's a slightly complex thing to explain, but if I had to cut it down into basics, we're a digital performance marketing agency that also invests in businesses. And then we also obviously provide a full plethora of services, because paid doesn't just drive revenue and profitability anymore on its own. You do need assistance from organic. You do need assistance from SEO. It all kind of works together. There was a point in time where you could just, turn a blind eye to organic stuff, or turn a blind eye to SEO and just run paid. And if you had enough money that you were pumping into your ads, you were fine. But that's no longer the case. So we have a full kind of digital service offering. But our core thing is performance marketing, and then also investing. So we invest. The great thing about being an agency is we get to see the numbers. And so if we start with a client earlier on in their career, and we see growth potential, we can also get involved as a shareholder at a lower kind of valuation and reap the rewards as we scale the business together. So that's the one side. And we've got about 13 or 14 active ventures at the moment. But yeah, over and above that, I mean, we have got departments dedicated to everything here. So we have a UGC department that just focuses on creating user-generated content, whether it's for ads, whether it's for organics. We've got, our own in-house content studio where we put together the creatives that go on ads and go on organic social. We've got an SEO team. We've got a data analytics and tracking team that are involved at really looking at the numbers and making sense of the data that we're getting, so that we can always optimize even better than we were doing before, etc. So we've got a full team in-house that does everything.
I was going to say, so it's I mean, just the digital marketing part of it is complex enough, and then you have this higher level of the venture, the venture business, which is layers upon layers. It seems very complex. But if we kind of just focus in on that digital marketing part of it, you mentioned that you're able to look at the numbers of these businesses, whether they're coming on as a client or as someone that you're going to be investing in, and those are the numbers that you want to grow, that you want to scale as much as possible. How much does intuition and creativity engage with that versus just purely looking at the numbers and running by the data? Are you more informed by data or by that kind of creative gut that so many marketers have?
We're totally confirmed. Let me redo that. We're totally informed by data, but what we do is heavy testing. So testing is part of our DNA, and so we do a lot of testing. We test hooks, we test certain styles of image or video, different messaging, different audiences, etc. So there's a lot of testing that goes on. In fact, we dedicate a certain amount of budget towards testing. And then and every test also has a hypothesis. So we say, this is the hypothesis. Are we going to prove it or disprove it? If we're able to prove it, we move on to the next step and move on to the next step. And it's really about coming down with a solid plan of action and then being able to iterate on that.
Doesn't that feel like a very expensive or resource intensive way of looking at things? Because, like you say, it's testing upon testing, you're refining and then testing. Why is that the direction that you feel is the better way of going?
Yeah, look, I think for a lot of our clients, they are looking for growth and they're looking for growth very quickly. And so for us, that's the best way to do it. It's about finding what works. And as soon as you know what works, you can put a lot of money behind it because you know that it works. So it's really about scaling. You have a learning phase and a learning budget, which is dedicated fully just to learning. But then you've got the rest. That's all about scaling and growing and just doing minor tweaks and updates, etc. Obviously, I would say there is some intuition involved to an extent as part of, when we're putting together hypotheses that we want to test. I mean, a lot of it is data-led, but in the same breath, a lot of it is we've seen this work for someone else. Should we try it? And I guess one of the great things about having, a whole bunch of clients is that we also get to see what works with other brands within our own stable that we're working on. And we're able to then test and iterate and try and work out if it can work for other companies as well. It's about finding that framework and getting that framework up to date. And I think you lose a lot less money in the long term that way. But again, you also need to have some kind of runway. So I think if you are bootstrapping and it's month to month that your company is going, you're living from month to month, it becomes very difficult. But if you've got, R500,000 Rand that you can dedicate just to getting it right, finding the right formula, and then, we really scale, that's where the real magic happens.
That makes sense because, there's that famous quote that 50% of marketing works. The tough thing is knowing which 50%. And I guess what you're doing is, well, no, it doesn't have to be only 50%. It can be 85%. And with more testing, we can get up to 95%. And, in an ideal world, 100%. I mean, that will never truly happen because then you won't have a job. So, but still, like the idea is it doesn't have to be as much guesswork. There can be a science behind it, which is really fascinating, I guess.
Completely.
If you've been working with quite a few businesses in your career, you've done extensive work in radio, you've been working with a lot of the theater people, you've been doing some ad hoc work around the space, you've been in this particular position for a few years now. When it comes to the actual work experience, what are the pros and cons of being in a particular business that you have a set role and that's what you do, maybe versus a more freelance lifestyle, or and I guess we could kind of call R17 an agency to an extent in the way that you're dealing with multiple clients. So are there pros and cons to being in that agency lifestyle versus maybe just being in a marketing department of a shoe business?
Look, I think it depends, and it really is person specific. Agency is great because you're on the grind, you're learning quickly, you're growing quickly, you're getting multiple opportunities to test things, to do things, to really refine your craft, and you get to see the opportunity to improve multiple brands in one space, which is a great kind of personal feeling. I think in-house is probably less fast-paced. And again, it depends on the size of the business, but I think in most businesses, it's generally a lot less fast-paced, but more slower. So I think some people prefer that. I think that the in-house solution, though, and I realize I'm saying this as an agency, but I don't think it works for most kind of companies. Reason being is that once you've hired someone based on their CV, based on their interview, you're stuck with them. And so if there are problems that come up, if someone's misrepresented their skills or they just aren't as jacked as you thought they were, you're stuck with them. Whereas when you have an agency partner or a freelancer that you're working with, you can always, cut ties. If you've got an agency, they can throw in another individual. You can literally say to the agency, guys, so-and-so is not doing it for us, and they'll put somebody else in immediately that'll pick up the slack. They've also got the team support, which you don't really have in-house to an extent. I mean, if I look at our offices here, we've got, 50 young people hungry about digital that can all share ideas with each other. You say, I'm really struggling with this account. I've done everything I can. And someone says, oh, why don't you try this? And why don't you try that? In-house, I'm really struggling with this account. Who am I going to phone or ask on LinkedIn for some free advice? So it becomes one of those tricky ones, I guess, in-house, because you just don't have the group knowledge share that you have. And so I think that's also something nice to tap into. Freelance, in the same respect, you don't really have that group knowledge share, but you're working on multiple accounts. So you do have that creative outlet, and you have the opportunity to see the impact that you make on multiple businesses as opposed to a single business. So I guess, it really comes down to the individual. I find that people who are more hungry for growth, and really, when I say growth, not just for their clients, but for themselves. They want to grow in themselves. Agency is the kind of the best place to be. It's the place where you really hone your skills. There's a lot of pressure, but also there's a lot of reward at the end of it. And, when you work with, I guess, the traditional agency model of, work 19 hours, 20 hours a day is kind of disappearing somewhat. I know that we're pretty strict on, trying to keep as close to your core hours as possible, and we have flexi time, and we have, remote days and in-office days, etc. Like any other company, we really, put employee comfort first, or employee wellness first. So I think that's super important. But it really just depends on the individual. If you've got that hunger and that growth, agency is definitely the place for you. And I think a lot of what we see is a lot of the top guys in agency usually leave agency after 10 or so years, and then they go in-house. But that's because they've also had an opportunity to mold their skills And when they do go in-house, they go in-house into a managerial position where they'll probably hire agencies, but because of their knowledge, they can hold those agencies accountable and they can spar with those agencies. So you need to have a sparring partner, especially at certain high levels. Otherwise, you don't know if the agency's really taking advantage of you or not. So we find that our best clients are the ones that actually have a knowledge of exactly what we're doing, because we become sparring partners. Have you tried this? Yes, we have. No, we haven't. This is why. And you really just have that backwards and forwards to come up with the best possible solution.
Yeah, and some of the, best campaigns that we've seen are agencies working for companies that they have really good relationships with. They've worked with the company for many, many years. They understand the product and the brand sometimes better than the people in the company itself. And when that works well, it's amazing results that you get. But I guess there is that additional burden on someone within the company to help build that relationship with the agency, and that's that's a whole discussion in and of itself. I think we could do a whole episode just on relationship building with agencies, how to choose them, how to brief agencies correctly, because I've seen people brief agencies and you're starting the whole thing off on the wrong foot. All of that kind of conversation, that's a whole other podcast. When it comes to your day-to-day work, especially when it comes to the the analysis of the data, which I'm assuming is a big part of what your company does in general, is analyzing lots of amount of information. What kind of tools are you using regularly to do your work?
Yeah, so it's a good question. When we're analyzing data, we have Roger, who is our head of tracking and analytics, who puts together these incredible Google Sheets for us. We find that Google Sheets just is, as plain and simple as it has got so much packed into it that you can do. And so he puts together these Google Sheets and these Looker Studio dashboards for us that do all the magic. There's a lot of kind of data analysis and data science that goes into also simplifying the data for us so that we're able to understand it. But also, for us, it's about looking at, even in ad accounts or in general, looking at the soft stats and the hard stats. So depending on what it is that we are optimizing for, we can use those. So, if we're optimizing for leads, for example, the hard stats, of course, are how many leads came in, what is the quality of the leads, how many became a SQL, how many became a SAL, how many became a qualified client. On the other side of the thing, we've got the soft stats. So looking at the click-throughs, which creative drove the most clicks, what messaging works to get you the most clicks, looking at how many clicks you're getting, the cost per click, the CPMs. For us, we don't put too much focus on CPMs, click-throughs, and CPC, etc. They are important, but they're not the most important, because if ultimately you might have a higher CPM, a higher cost per click, but you get a high quality client as a result of that lead that came through, it really doesn't it sorts itself out. It doesn't matter so much. So we work quite extensively with our clients to work across their funnels. So even in lead generation, understanding that it doesn't just end at getting the lead, it's about what happens after that lead. So we're able to optimize campaigns based on that. And so understanding that data, and also being able to put together simulations based on what data we're seeing, or to be able to work out how we can improve. So we've got some simulation models that we use also.
There's a whole, again, another episode in season 2 that I would love to bring you back on, just talking about metrics, because firstly there's this alphabet language that if you're new to digital marketing, like CPM, CPC, SQL, MQL, if you're hearing Jono say all those things and you're like, I have no idea what those are, that's fine. Don't stress, because one day we will get to breaking all of those down. But a big thing that I just got out of everything you're saying is that it is crucial to not just understand what the metrics are, but understand which ones are most important to what you're trying to do right now. Are there any specific metrics that, this isn't a question I prepped you for, but are there any metrics that you across the board go, this is something that people should be looking at? You're saying you don't always worry about CPMs, but is there something that you do with every campaign go, I'm concerned about this number?
Yes, customer acquisition cost.
There we go. You see, like that is something, because that's the final thing, right? That's the end. That is the actual number. That is the most important, and how we measure that and how we get to that. We will talk about that one day in the future. Because again,
in our next episode, next season,
in next season, there might just be a season on metrics. I think that might just be a whole thing, because I think this is what we're going to be discovering as I go through creating this podcast further on. Is that when we talk about digital marketing, it's not one thing. It's 50 different things that we've kind of collected into this one generic term. And your experience of digital marketing completely varies from mine, because you're doing completely different work, still under the umbrella, but it's completely different.
Yeah, even if we look at you could take it a step further. All the equations go into working out what your customer acquisition cost is, but sometimes it's okay to acquire a customer for significantly more than they're paying you because of lifetime value. So if you take lifetime value into the equation, you can reduce your customer acquisition cost. But again, that's for next season.
But the great thing about even just having this conversation right now is just to let people know that I think a lot of people look at social media and digital marketing and marketing in general and go, it's really easy. Oh no, I totally understand it, And I think the Dunning-Kruger effect it works really hard in digital marketing, because someone will go, oh, I make posts on Facebook. I have 200 people who follow me on Instagram. I know how to do this. And the moment you scratch the surface, you suddenly realize that there's this beast of information, of different strategies, of different methods to achieve the multiple goals that you can possibly have. And that's what we're going to be trying to break down in this podcast, is getting into that real subsurface information that people need. I want to end on this question for you. If there was a thing called Duguid's Law, it sounds like the name in the law should be that, do good. But if it was Jono's Law, if there was such a thing called Jono's Law, and it can be about anything, what would Jono's Law state?
Jono's Law, and I'll keep it to digital marketing, which spans the full scope of whatever you're working in, is know your objective and make sure that everything you do aligns with that objective. So if it's paid media that you are optimizing for that ad, for that purchase, for that lead, if you're doing organic social content, have a purpose for the post. Don't put a post out for the sake of. What is the objective of that post? Is it to get you more traffic to your website? Is it to heighten your brand's awareness, et cetera, et cetera? But there's got to be an actual objective. Don't just do something for the sake of doing it. Even with keywords, putting, on your SEO side of things, know your objective. You don't want to have keywords that don't really align with what your business is or what your client's business is. Always know your objective and work towards that.
A big thank you to Jono for giving us his time and expertise during this interview. You can follow Jono on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to his profile in the show notes. And of course, a big thank you to you for listening to this episode of the South African Digital Marketing Podcast. If you are listening on Spotify, please leave a comment in the app and I'll respond to you there. Otherwise, you can send your thoughts, opinions, and questions to podcast@tmdigital.co.za. That's podcast@T for Tango, M for Mother, digital.co.za. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen and share this episode with whoever you think would make some use of it. Thank you so much. This was the SA Digital Marketing Podcast.